what happened to the Dutch Antilles during the Second World War. Because you may think these islands were far away from Nazi aggression, but you'd be wrong, because the Nazis did carry out an attack on both Aruba and Curaçao. This here is a story of the Dutch Antilles during the Second World War, as I'm here in front of a World War II monument in Willemstad, Curaçao. Keep watching. The history of the Netherlands Antilles, or the Dutch West Indies and the Netherlands, goes back more than 400 years. During the time of the voyages of discovery, the Spanish arrived on the islands. They enslaved the inhabitants. In 1634, the islands were conquered by the Dutch West India Company, the WIC, which was an association of Dutch traders. They transported African slaves to the islands. Slavery was eventually abolished by the Dutch in 1863. The islands of the Antilles consisted of the islands of Curaçao, Aruba and Bonaire, near Venezuela and the mainland of South America, and the islands of Sint Maarten, Saba and Sint Eustatius, near US Puerto Rico. In 1940, Curaçao had 67,000 inhabitants, Aruba 31,000 and Bonaire 6,000, and the others about 4,000 in total. The Netherlands was attacked on May 10th, 1940, and from that moment the Dutch colonies overseas, Dutch Antilles, Suriname as well as the Dutch East Indies were on their own. 7 German ships that were in the ports here were seized by the Dutch, although the German crew did try to set fire on these ships. Also immediately in Suriname as well as in the Dutch Antilles, German inhabitants were arrested, regardless of the fact that they were Nazi supporters or not. Already on May 10th, they were apprehended, and this also included German Jews that had fled Germany. Regardless of their sympathies, they were arrested. In the Antilles, they were transferred to Bonaire. On Aruba and Curaçao, there was much more economic activity, hence Bonaire was chosen. First, the internees on Bonaire were housed in 3 school buildings, one for the women and children, one for German sailors and one for other men. After only a few days, the sailors revolted, and not long afterwards they were transferred to British Jamaica. The camp on Bonaire was completed in July 1940. It could house more than 200 internees. It was a relatively small camp with modest security. The women and the children were housed in small houses, the men in a large shed. Just as in Suriname, security was significantly strengthened after an escape attempt in September 1941. From that moment on, large spotlights were focused on the camp day and night. During the Second World War, a total of 461 people were transported to Bonaire and imprisoned. On May 11th, 1940, 180 French soldiers arrived in Aruba, and 2 days later, some 800 British soldiers arrived in Curaçao. They came to protect the refineries in particular. These were considered crucial for processing oil from nearby Venezuela into gasoline for the Allies. After the Netherlands surrendered to Germany, officially on the 15th of May 1940, the local governors gained more power because the Dutch government had evacuated to London and paid less attention to the overseas territories. In July 1940, the French soldiers in Aruba were replaced by British, as France had surrendered. Along the coast of Curaçao, guns were placed to protect the coast and especially the harbor, and also 2 Dutch and 3 Norwegian ships were armed for escorting the oil tankers. Initially, the Germans did not want to attack the islands so as not to provoke the Americans, who were not officially involved in the war until December 1941. Meanwhile, oil refining capacity in the Antilles was greatly expanded. At one point in mid-1941, 80% of all Allied gasoline was coming from the Antilles. In early 1942, some 6 American planes started flying to and from the Antilles. Americans were stationed on Aruba, and the runway of Dakota Airport was extended. Large camouflage parking lots for the American planes were built around the airport. The area was cordoned off with barbed wire and guarded by American troops. Curaçao's Hato Airport was also modernized considerably. Thus, during World War II, Hato became one of the most important and busiest airports in the Caribbean. The runway at Bonaire's small airport was also extended. After the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii in December 1941, the Americans became officially involved in the war. Soon, the Japanese advanced into Asia and the attack on the Dutch East Indies began. In early February 1942, Americans replaced the British military in the Antilles with 1,400 US soldiers on Curaçao and 1,100 on Aruba. The Germans were now also at war with America, and just 4 days after the Americans arrived, the Germans launched Operation Paukenschlag with German submarine attacks. These attacks came as a complete surprise to the Americans on their east coast between Florida and New York, but also the Caribbean was part of the operation. On the night of February 15th and 16th, 1942, the first German torpedo was fired in the war in the Western Hemisphere. A tanker was torpedoed off Aruba by the German U-156, but it did not sink, though 4 other tankers sank that night. Off Curaçao, south of Willemstad's Anna Bay, a tanker was torpedoed at 4 a.m. on the same day. The ship broke in half. In the first weeks of the German operation with submarines, a total of no less than 21 Allied ships were sunk. Some more intense German submarine attacks followed in late 1942. In the Antilles, the CAFC was established in 1942. The American command commanded all forces, Aruba and Curaçao. This worked in conjunction with the local troops and militia. On Aruba, the militia were stationed at Savanet near the local American camp. The militia was mainly involved in artillery and coastal defense. Blackouts were introduced and ships started sailing in convoy with some placed anti-aircraft guns on them. American aircraft were also stationed for reconnaissance and against submarine attacks. In general, the Americans did not have a high opinion of the local troops. They also looked down on the various races, so to say, in the local Dutch militia. The US Army still had strictly separate ethnicities and ranks. The American presence did stimulate the local economy immensely, although of course it still sometimes caused problems for the local inhabitants. Of course, the Germans had no planes at their disposal in the Caribbean region, so a pure air defense was actually not necessary. In October 1942, Prince Bernhard, the husband of Princess Juliana, visited Curaçao. I wanted to mention George Maduro, a man of Jewish descent that was born on Curaçao, fought as an officer at the Battle of Ypenburg during the German invasion of the Netherlands, joined the resistance during the German occupation, and would eventually die in Dachau concentration camp. The miniature city of Maduro Dam is named after him. I also wanted to mention Segundo George Adalberto, or Boy, Ecuri, who came from Bonaire, but went to school in the Netherlands. He witnessed the German bombing of Rotterdam in May 1940 and later joined the Dutch resistance. He bombarded German trucks with homemade incendiary bombs. He sabotaged railway lines and offered help to people in hiding and Allied pilots. At one point, Boy had to go into hiding himself. The Germans hunted down the resistance fanatically, and Boy stood out too much with his dark skin color. In November 1944, he was arrested in Rotterdam. Shortly after, at the age of 22, he was executed on the Waaldorpse Vlakte, where many Dutch resistance members were killed. The islands of Sint Maarten, Saba and Sint Eustatius felt little of the war but did experience scarcity. This was the result of the termination of the ship connection with Curaçao in 1942 because of possible submarine actions. Construction of an airfield of Sint Maarten became urgent and was completed in 1943. During that year, the Germans were forced more on the defensive, and the submarine war played out mainly in the North Atlantic on the routes from America to Britain. By September 1943, local submarine attacks in the West were virtually over. In fact, the German threat was there for about a year and a half. That did not mean that the American force was dwindling, and in particular in Suriname, which was much larger than the Antilles, some 2,000 US soldiers remained stationed. In February and March 1944, Crown Princess Juliana again visited Curaçao, Aruba, Bonaire and Sint Maarten. She inaugurated the constructed airfield in Sint Maarten, and furthermore, this island was visited regularly by practicing American planes. Early 1944, when the war already took a very different turn and Germany was on the losing side, the number of military personnel was limited to about 500 men in March 1945. But the threat was not gone. Until 1944, some ships were still torpedoed off the coast of Aruba, among others. Germany capitulated in May 1945, but Japan remained at war. The effort was not only local. Many Antilleans and Surinamese enlisted during the war for service aboard ships and merchant marine as gunners. Hundreds lost their lives during the war's convoy attacks and at least 49 ships were lost. Some even went to the east and Australia and fought against the Japanese in Indonesia. In August 1945, World War II was over as Japan surrendered. I talked about Suriname specifically in another video. If you have not seen my video on Suriname during World War II, click here. Thanks for watching and I'll see you later.